Members of Council, if I can please ask you to take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Members, if you could, members, if I can ask members of Council to please rise. Please rise for a moment of silence, and during this time, please remember Joan Myrtle Roberts. Thank you. Mayor Tory, I understand that you wish to address Council at this time.
Speaker, very briefly, Madam Speaker, thank you. I've circulated it so that members of Council will be able to see it for themselves, but I just wanted to formally confirm my receipt of a letter from the Honourable Todd Smith, the Minister of Children and Community and Social Services, and it pertains to a matter that we were going to be dealing with today, and I think Deputy Mayor Councillor Thompson will deal with the disposition of that matter for your consideration, but it comes as very good news. They have reconsidered the decision they had made with respect to the transition child benefit, which, as you know, we had made representations to them that the removal of this benefit was going to be very bad, in particular for the families who relied on it, and the children in particular, and to the point where it was going to put great stress on our own, we felt our own housing, shelter, and social service support system because of them leaving this field. So they have now reconsidered that and are going to leave that benefit in place. And so I think, just as we're critical when they make a decision that we think is wrong, that we should be positive in saying that this was the right thing to do, both to reconsider and to leave this benefit in place for the families who rely on it, especially in regard to the stability of their housing. And I have also commented on our behalf, just to say that as the letter makes reference to the fact that they're continuing, as we know, with the review of social assistance generally, and that as they do that, we hope that they will consider favorably the function performed by this benefit. Whether there's a different form of it or something like that remains to be seen, but that we underlined, I guess, the importance of this particular kind of benefit for these particular families in these particular circumstances. But the main purpose is to bring to your attention this letter, which I have circulated to you to your offices this morning, and to say thank you to the Government of Ontario for listening to the concerns expressed not only by this mayor and this municipality, but by other cities across Ontario, and I'm sure on behalf of the families too, that I think it is something that's going to provide them with some degree of relief. Even though we were prepared to take steps necessary to make sure they didn't suffer, I think it's better that things should remain as they are, and that's what's going to happen going forward. So I just wanted to draw that to everyone's attention and make sure they got a copy of that letter. And as I say, Deputy Mayor Councillor Thompson will deal with the matter that was to have been in front of us this morning, which is no longer necessary to do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Members of Council, we will now review and confirm the order paper. There are 49 items left on the agenda, including 29 member motions. Yesterday, Council decided to consider item PH 8.1 on the review of electrical systems at Toronto Community Housing, update on maintenance and upgrade processes for electrical services as the first item of business this morning. Council also timed item EX 8.9 on the elimination of the transition child benefit as the first item after member motions this afternoon. However, in light of the Mayor's announcement this morning, I understand that the Chair of Economic and Community Development will be placing a motion to receive that item for information. City Council will consider member motions at 2 p.m. I will now take the release of holds. Please put your name under request to question staff. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good morning. In light of the Mayor's positive comment and the direction of the province and the Minister, I would like at this time to place a motion that City Council receive the item for information, and that item is EX 8.9, helping residents impacted by the elimination of the transition childcare benefit. I don't need to speak any further, Madam Speaker, other than to say that this is a great relief. And thank you, Mayor, for your leadership on this item, and certainly thank the Premier as well. I know we've had some discussions with everyone at Queen's Park, and I'm also very pleased the discussions we've had with Mr. Wallace as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the motion on page 3, EX 8.9, to receive the item, on favor? Carried. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to try and reduce the number of items from 48 to 46. On page 4, North York Community Council 8.3 and 8.4, which are tied together. And the motions are to defer consideration both items to the December 17th and 18th meeting of City Council.
Okay. So on page 4, NY 8.3, motion to defer. On favor? Carried. NY 8.4, motion to defer. On favor? Carried. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. On page 3, NY 8.1, I'm prepared to release that. As for a recorded vote, I'd just like to be counted in the negative. And I understand there's a technical amendment to go along with it.
Do we have the technical amendment?
So, Madam Speaker, was this one vote or two?
Pardon?
Do we vote separately on the amendment, or do we take it the item as a
No, we
package?
vote on the amendment first and item as amended.
Okay.
Okay, so the amendment's on the screen. This is on page 3, NY 8.1. Would you like a recorded vote on this one, Councillor Pasternak, on the amendment?
Yes, a recorded vote on both, please.
Thank you. Recorded vote on the amendment.
Councillor Bradford, please. Councillor Layton.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. The amendment carries 18 to 1.
On the item as amended, recorded vote.
The item as amended is adopted 18 to 1.
Thank you. All those in favor of adopting the order paper? Carried. Okay. So we have a few members' motions that we'd like to introduce at this time. Councillor Thompson.
Okay. Yes, Speaker. This is a matter relating to Toronto Global. This council had approved a 5-year commitment. Those that information has to be adjusted because the province is actually adjusting their commitment. So we have to do it to ensure that it corresponds to the provincial adjustments.
Okay, on favor, carried. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. I believe this is, yes, it is an AGCO matter, and the deadline for comment is urgent.
On favor, carried. Councillor Cressy, you have another?
Thank you, Speaker. This is urgent as the support for the settlement is required before a scheduled hearing on October 8th.
On favor, carried. Thank you. Okay, so we'll now go to the timed item. Which is PH 8.1, which is on page 3. Review of electrical systems at Toronto Community Housing. Do we have questions? We have staff that are here. Okay, if you have questions, can you please put your name up? Request a question, staff. Councillor Wong Tam, questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and Councillor Fletcher is here. My first question is to Deputy Chief Jim Jessup from Toronto Fire. Can you describe the history of the fire incidents in TCHC buildings from a citywide perspective and the difference between the frequency of fires between TCHC managed buildings and contracted out buildings?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Speaker, we've been monitoring these numbers for the last number of years, as Council certainly knows. And as of 2019, and this has been consistent through 2018 as well, the number of fires that Toronto Fire has responded to in Toronto community housing buildings represents 6% of all fires that we have responded to, both in 2018 and 2019. And when we did the analysis, the contract managed buildings represent 21% of the 6%. So 21% of the fires within Toronto community housing buildings that represent 6% of city fires in total occur in contract managed buildings.
And can you describe your experience related to the history of the violations and fines in both TCHC and contract managed buildings? Are those fines being paid out?
Through the Speaker, so a couple points. So certainly in terms of convictions registered in 2019 so far, Toronto Community Housing has been convicted in Provincial Offences Court and fined over $200,000. When we broke that down, the fines for the contract managed buildings were $124,000 as opposed to $76,000 for TCH managed. We've noted a number of our most egregious violations, some of them candidly almost impacting the safety of firefighters over the last year or two, have occurred in contract managed buildings, and hence I approached the new president and CEO, Kevin Marshman, earlier this summer and brought this to his attention for his review. And I believe the CEO has already done some analysis. So certainly the observations of Toronto Fire is that there's a distinct difference for sure.
And then my final question is, can you speak to the number and cost of false fire alarms in TCHC managed buildings and TCHC contracted out buildings?
Certainly, again, through the Speaker, false alarms continue to be an issue. So in 2019, and the numbers are very, very consistent. So between 2018 and 2019, approximately 3,500 to 4,000 false fire alarms have occurred in Toronto community housing buildings. And when we look at the breakdown between those that are managed by Toronto Community Housing and those that are contract managed, 27% of those false alarms are occurring in contract managed buildings. The false alarm fees that I can tell you are up to date as of yesterday when we had Toronto Fire Services Finance check. On average, Toronto Community Housing has been paying Toronto Fire approximately $3 million a year over the last 3 years for false fire alarms. Unfortunately, Councillor, we don't have the ability to break down the fine structure between TCH managed and contract managed buildings.
Thank you. That's very helpful. My next question is to MLS. In your earlier report to Council entitled Vital Service Disruptions in Apartment Buildings, you recommended that building owners and operators develop an electrical maintenance plan. You reference Z463-18 electrical system standard. And is that the standard that MLS recommends residential building owners and operators use?
Through the speaker, yes, that's correct.
But that is the, and is TCHC meeting that standard right now? Because we're asking this of privately owned building owners to meet that particular standard. Or are they meeting something equivalent to?
I'm not certain on that if it's equivalent, something I'd have to look into. It's something we would work with TCHC and Electrical Safety Authority to make sure that we are meeting the requirements of the CSA.
Okay, so then just because this is a pretty important issue, my next question is to Electrical Safety Authority. Would ESA recommend that TCHC or the city adopt the electrical standard maintenance program of Z463-18 for the maintenance of TCHC residential buildings? Because we're asking this of privately owned buildings. Should we adhere to that same standard?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's the de facto standard for most industries to go to for electrical building maintenance.
Councilwoman Tam, that was your last question. Yeah. No, that was your last question.
I want to clarify he heard the question. Does Mr. Smith have the right to the opportunity to answer that question?
If you can answer that question, please.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
By what that standard is, the one that's known as Z463-18, recommended by ESA. What does it entail?
So at a very high level, it's the de facto standard that industry uses to do scheduled maintenance of buildings. And in effect, it has the requirement for infrared dielectric testing, switch operation, lubrication, and retorquing and cleaning of the system.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, those statistics that we got from Mr. Jessup, that was 21% of 6%. Can you tell me what those percentages cover?
Through the speaker, Councillor, are we speaking about the fires or the fines? Can you just clarify, please?
Fires. You said there were,
fires.
Of all the fires. So how many fires were there altogether? And what's 6%? And then we can look at what 21% is.
So, Councillor, actual structure fires, in 2018, Toronto Community Housing had 201, and as of today in 2019, we've responded to actual confirmed structure fires 130. Again, between 2018 and 2019, those represent about 22 to 20% consistently occurring in the contract managed buildings. And then those total fires, so the 201 in 2018 and the 130 so far in 2019, represent 6% of all of the total structure fires Toronto Fire has responded to citywide.
Yes, and I'm interested in the total number of structures.
So citywide, Councillor, in 2018, Toronto Fire responded to 3,345, and in 2019, 2,351 as of yesterday.
All right. And this is a strange question, and you probably can't answer it yet, but because it really has to do with large apartment owners in the city. There are some landlords that are fairly large, and just the percentage of fires based on the number of units that they have. Have you ever looked at that to see? Toronto Community Housing is a very large landlord. It has, I think, Mr. Marshman, about 54,000 actual apartments or units. So being so large, it's not surprising that there's such a large percentage. I'm just interested in other large portfolios. There's probably apartment building owners that have maybe 10,000 units. So is that ratio of fires or false alarms consistent with the number of units? Do you know what I'm saying? We're looking at ratios, not just hard numbers.
So through the Speaker, so Councillor, we haven't broken down landlord by landlord. Obviously, Toronto Community Housing is the largest landlord, and we would expect a larger number of incidents. Certainly, the number of false alarms have been consistent, but there really isn't a comparable landlord with the volume and the size of the portfolio that TCH has that I could...
totally understand there's no comparable landlord, but I guess I'll ask MLS because they know the apartments. What's the next large landlord down from Toronto Community Housing with the number of units?
We work with a number of landlords and property owners, but I don't have specifics as to its company A or B.
Well, so what would the next largest portfolio be?
Again, I don't know specifically who's the largest portfolio. We work with each building. We work with a number of groups. We work with the GTAA.
So you don't actually say X landlord who has 8,000 units in the city of Toronto has this many infractions or this many fires or this many false alarms. You have no comparators here, ratio-wise. I don't mean hard numbers. I mean from a ratio point.
No, I do not.
And through
MLS does not do that. Is that what you're telling me?
It's an analysis we would need to undertake, but I haven't looked at it from a...
Let's have a look at that at some
Yep.
point. Mr. Marshman, did you want to comment on any of that? You look like you do, but no? Okay. So does Toronto Fire have that type of information? I mean, you must know when you're going back to a particular landlord, and I'm not going to say any names, but somebody, I think there's probably a company that has 8,000, 10,000 units somewhere in the city, and I'm very interested in their statistics. Do you have that?
So through the Speaker, that's something we have not done. We know anecdotally where we've had challenges in the last number of years, and certainly Councillor Wong-Tam's area obviously has been one of them in St. Jamestown, but we have never done an analysis in terms of every type of different landlord and the number of units and the number of violations. Certainly on a building-by-building perspective, we could pull that up.
I do understand that, but you're able to put together all of TCHC. So maybe there's, I'm not going to say anything, but there are large landlords in the city. You've never aggregated the statistics for them in the way that you have for TCHC.
No, we've never been asked to do that, Councillor.
Thank you. And Mr. Marsham, what percentage of the TCHC
Counselor,
portfolio is contract managed?
Counselor, that was your last question.
I just
Thank you. If I could please have some quiet in the council chambers. It's very noisy. Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I had a technical question about this report and the system. So I understand electrical systems are innately hazardous because they're electrical, and in the report it describes some of the work that is done. So I see infrared and thermography testing. Tightening and lubricating is completed on electrical panels. But I wonder if TCHC or any of the staff here could tell me how this relates to other inspections of the environment in the building. And more specifically, if you've got a roof that leaks onto an electrical panel, or a basement that floods, or the exterior wall of a building leaks water and it gets into the electrical system, that's a particular hazard. And if we're sending electrical contractors, as stated in the report, are they looking at the environmental factors around the electrical system, or is that outside of their scope of work?
Through the Speaker, yes, when we're doing inspections on buildings, they would take a look at the panels and they would see if there was water penetration or things like that, and that would be noted, and then any deficiencies would be rectified.
How about just inspecting the condition of the roof, for potential to leak or it's ready to fail, that type of stuff? In other words, trying to catch the potential for a water leak over a critical area ahead of time. And I realize it may be much to ask an electrician to give consideration to the roof.
Correct. The electrical inspector would not be inspecting a roof, but we do have preventive maintenance programs in place throughout our portfolio that do roof inspections, for example.
So are you confident in the other preventative maintenance programs are adequate enough to give consideration to electrical hazards that may be generated through the failure of another building component, be it the plumbing system or the roof or the windows, or just vandalism, people breaking open covers of things or wear and tear on things or broken outlets that become exposed, so those physical type of things.
Yes, we do have a good PM program in place throughout our portfolio to look at the major systems, as well as we do have building staff that are there in the buildings on a daily basis, and if they see anything, for example, vandalism or something like that, they would report that and then it would be corrected.
Do you have any sense out of identified hazards over the past or incidences or electrical fires, how many of them may be related to external factors just beyond the pure electrical system that you would be inspecting with an electrician? So that type of thing where water has come in and caused a short circuit or potentially caused a fire because water leaked onto a transformer.
Councillor, through the speaker, that is not information that I have readily available, but I will work with the fire life safety staff to determine if that is available to us.
Okay, but the bottom line is you feel comfortable that there are enough systems and redundancy in the preventative maintenance and inspections in place to cover off where different risks overlap with each other and result in electrical hazards or fire hazards.
Through the speaker, yes, we do, but we are always looking to improve those processes and deliver to a higher standard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So just to carry off some of my colleagues' questions here. So from my understanding, what percentage of the City of Toronto's population do we house in Toronto Community Housing? 4.
Yes, I don't have that percentage readily available, but we have 110,000 residents by, approximately 3 million in the City of Toronto itself,
Okay.
Council.
And yeah, I think it ranged, I'm hearing different things, maybe 7%, 6%. So we have the percentage of fires is 6%?
Yes.
To TCAT for total fire calls in the City of Toronto?
Yes, that's what Deputy
Yeah.
reported.
So what's the, I think it may have been mentioned in one of my colleagues' questions, but what is the breakdown between contract managed and TCAT managed for those fire calls?
Yeah, I think just give me 1 second. I'll look at Jim's notes. I think it was roughly in the 22% range in terms of fires in contract managed buildings of the 6%. And roughly the contract managed building percentage of the total portfolio, the number of suites, is about 21%. 21%.
It's about on par.
It's roughly equivalent, yes.
And I guess the fire life safety systems in the buildings, is it TCAT's responsibility or is it the contractor that takes care of them?
Ultimately, it's GCH's responsibility, whether they choose to facilitate the actual execution of that responsibility through the contractor. We, as the landlord, are ultimately responsible for what happens in our contract managed buildings and what happens in our direct managed buildings.
Right. And in the calls that Toronto Fire has responded to.
Councillor Ford,
yes.
hold on.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. It is very noisy in here. Please. Councillor Cressy. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So following up on the percentage of fire calls that Toronto Fire Service responds to, what would, are there any breakdown in percentages of arson or, I guess, human-caused issues and state of good repair calls?
Through the Speaker, yes. So specifically in Toronto Community Housing, which is, poses some unique challenges in terms of fire cause. So the three leading causes of fire in Toronto Community Housing buildings are intentionally set fires, careless smoking, and then unattended candles, which is actually sort of the opposite compared to the rest of the citywide. So certainly, they have a significant challenge with persons that are intentionally setting fires in their buildings. Now, the good news is over the last number of years, what the Investment Council has made and the priorities that Chief Pegg has put on Toronto Community Housing, those are trending downwards, Councillor. So we are absolutely seeing a turn of the curve right now in terms of those types of fires and the causes in those buildings.
Excellent. And what I want to, so Toronto Community Housing hired, I believe, was it a fire life safety officer at one point in time, and they were looking at the causes of fires in the building and how do we work with Toronto Fire Service to kind of mitigate these issues. How much headway has that individual made?
It's actually not a single individual. There is a team, and we actually, sorry, through the Speaker, we have three inspectors within our fire life safety group, and they act much in the same regard as the Toronto Fire Services inspectors would do. And so, in fact, when the deputy chief alerted me to his concern in the contract managed portfolio, we put a blitz in place in July and identified inspected a number of buildings and identified a number of contraventions, which we have worked through to resolve and complete by the end of September on that. And based on the results that we had in that, we are completing the rest of the contract managed portfolio in Q4 as a priority to ensure that we bring them to a standard that we find acceptable.
And in the 10-year capital plan, have those inspectors had any kind of not influence on the 10-year capital plan, but prioritize what they think is critical to address first and foremost in that plan?
Sure. The fire life safety team would be working not only with the capital planning department, the facilities management department, but other departments within it. And so how that has manifested itself, it is my understanding that all of our buildings are to code. The code is actually attached to the date the building was built. And so as a process, we are bringing all buildings up through this 10-year capital plan to the more current standards. And in fact, I think it's within the St. Jamestown area, we are already working on 5 buildings within that area. And we proactively did that as a result of some other occurrences that happened in that area at a private landlord.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the questions. Oh, Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you. I just had one follow-up question. Do you know how many of these fires are intentionally set?
Through the Speaker, intentionally set fires are the leading cause of fires in Toronto Community Housing buildings, but I do not have a percentage breakdown compared to the other two. But unlike any other sort of area in the City of Toronto, it is a unique problem that we've been working with Kevin on and his TCH staff, but it is absolutely unique to that building stock that it is the leading cause of fires for those buildings.
Okay. In Toronto, is there a part of the city that has more fires in TCHC buildings than in any other part?
So through the Speaker,
that would be intentionally set?
Through the Speaker, there's no other landlord or program or building stock area that we have been able to identify where intentionally set fires is the leading cause. Generally, it's unattended cooking, it's unattended candles, and it's careless smoking. But this is a unique problem to that subset, and we've brought it to their attention, and we've been working not only with Toronto Community Housing, but certainly with Toronto Police as well, because as certainly it is a criminal offense. So the 3 partners have been working together since this analysis has been done.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just a couple of quick questions around additional costs. I heard comments made with respect to fines, but when fires occur, there's a additional disruption So how do you prepare for that? For example, if you have a fire on a specific floor, do you move the resident to another location? Do you bring buses in? And what are the additional costs associated with those elements?
Through the Speaker, Councillor, I don't have the cost number of those specifically readily available to me, but I can certainly provide that information to you. Certainly, what we do is if a floor needs to be evacuated, in some cases, the fire is confined to the unit and the floor is fine, so it's the single resident that's impacted. In other cases, as you can imagine, it could be the floor or multiple floors, and we would rehouse those individuals. So depending on the time of day and exactly the plans in place, it would perhaps start with buses, immediately, but then we would get them into some form of shelter, typically at a nearby hotel.
At a nearby hotel?
Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the questions. To speak, Councillor Fletcher.
Do you have a motion? I just don't know if it's
Is the motion ready?
ready. This is just, I have another one, but I'll do it at committee. This is just really, because TCHC has so many apartments, 55,000, unlike any other landlord, we do need to have some comparators, not for the numbers, because 201 fires is TCHC. That is, of the portfolio, a certain percentage. I think it's helpful to know with other larger landlords how that compares. There are, and that nobody has 50-odd thousand units in their portfolio, but some may have 8, 10. So that is our comparator with percentages, not numbers. And I do think because there's such large numbers, it's important to understand the percentages and see how far, if TCHC is such an outlier for percentages, because it looks like a very, very large number. I'm also interested, and I didn't have a chance to prepare this motion. It came out of one of the things that our chief has said, or deputy has said, which is the number of intentionally set fires. So I am going to guess, I could be wrong, but I'm going to guess that they're concentrated in certain areas of the city, and in particular clusters or buildings where there are more than a few vulnerable tenants. I don't know if I'm right, but I will be asking that question at committee. So Mr. Jessup's always so great because he always prepares everything ahead of time. So that is, I think, if we know that, then in our tenants first plan, one of the things that we have looked at and been clear we want to accomplish is handling vulnerable tenants in a certain way and have a plan for buildings where there are vulnerable tenants concentrated. And I think if that lines up with buildings, then we have a really good empirical bit of knowledge that we have these problem buildings. We know maybe one, Councillor Wong-Tam has identified one, but maybe there's more. And then that needs to be that conversation with the city and TCHC, because obviously it's just not a normal landlord and tenant type situation. So this is just one of the ways that we can see where we have issues. And I do know that there are particular buildings where those things happen. So this is an important conversation. I want to know if in the percentage of fires per building that per portfolio, if TCHC is average, or if TCHC is way over, or if TCHC is under. But we don't know until we know how that stacks up against other landlords that have a large number of buildings. So I think that's important for any further discussions as well. And I just want to thank the Deputy, Mr. Marshman, and everyone else for that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion, and the clerks will put that on the screen. is that the City Council, as a sole shareholder, direct TCHC Board of Directors to direct the President and CEO to adopt no later than March 31st, 2020, the Canadian Standards Association Z463-18 Maintenance of Electrical Systems, or an equivalent of, as electrical maintenance standard for TCHC buildings, both internally managed by TCHC and those that are contracted out. Madam Speaker, by way of again, a background, earlier this year, City Council adopted a report that actually gave MLS the powers to amend the Rent Safe program, and that's through the vital service disruptions in apartment buildings. And specifically in that report, it referenced this particular standard of what we wanted building owners, building managers to actually adhere to in terms of the electrical system standard of maintenance. And this is not necessarily is something that was devised without context. It actually comes from the Canadian Standards Association, which actually developed this and actually is adopted throughout the world. So it's very clear about what maintenance means under that particular standard. There's no ambiguity, and it's a very comprehensive approach to electrical maintenance. The great thing of it is that TCHC managed buildings already have an electrical program, and they actually are working towards something that is equivalent or very close to, maybe not meeting every single standard within the CSA, but TCHC is making great strides with their internally managed buildings. The challenge, of course, is TCHC externally third-party contracted outbuildings are not adhered to that same standard. So when you are a TCHC resident, you get one level of service and standard if you're living within a TCHC managed building, and if you actually happen to live in a third-party managed building, it means that that electrical system may not be as well serviced and maintained as a TCHC managed building. So there are a couple of things for us to determine from this, is that if you have two standards of electrical maintenance with one particular landlord, that seems grossly unfair. Not to mention the fact that tenants who are living in TCHC third-party management buildings who do not have the same regiment of electrical system maintenance is at further risk. The problem here is that the risk comes with significant costs. And the cost would be, just by way of example, when 650 Parliament had their catastrophic failure of their electrical system, we know that that system was not maintained and well managed. We know that the equipment was outdated. And we know that if this particular standard recommended by ESA was on the table and adopted by them, then they would have had some better chance of actually ensuring that their residents were going to be safe. But instead, the cost is significant. And I can tell you that the city has already incurred about $4 million worth of costs to help manage the evacuation, the emergency response, and therefore. So in that case, by way of adhering to a standard that would be agreed to by the Electrical Safety Authority that's been set forward by the Canadian Standards Association, we would be averting some of those costs. And some of those costs would be around displacements, around the loss of housing, the interruption and disruptions to job, the interruptions and disruptions to family life, including the fact that the kids had to be hauled out of school. There was the TCHC burdens of having to then reach out to TTC buses to bring them in for shelters, temporary use, the ongoing hotel costs, the ongoing cost of shelter replacements, the mental health costs, and then just the costs overall. If 650 Parliament is going to adhere to this standard that's recommended in the Vital Service Disruption Report that was adopted by this council, the very least we could do is make sure that we, as a shareholder of TCHC, can do exactly the same thing. We have to meet the standard, and that's why the recommendation says that we're going to try to meet that standard or adopt the standard, something that's comparable. TCHC already is trying to do that with their own managed buildings, but unfortunately, those third-party contracted buildings, they are sort of floating out there without the same type of oversight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do have a question for you, Councillor Carroll. Clarification.
Yes, I love the intent. I'm just wondering if where this comes from. Have you talked to staff and worked with staff? Do we know that it would be achievable by March 31st of this coming year? What advance work do we know?
So my staff have been in communication. One of the reasons why we have a lineup of staff who are here from TCHC as well as Toronto Fire and ESA, MLS, one of the reasons why all the gentlemen are here today is because we specifically have been in communication with their offices, letting them know that this was the intention. So some of the questions I actually had asked today was largely derived from those conversations. So to answer your question, yes, this was actually discussed at the committee when we raised the matter at the first point in time. It was also discussed in the previous vital service disruptions report that came before council, and TCHC is striving to meet a particular standard, but they're not there yet. And because the previous report said to private managed buildings, we'd like you to try to meet the standard, and we haven't specifically said that to TCHC, so I'm trying to align the two. Hopefully that answers your question.
Right. Well, I'm just wondering about the date because it's October.
It is.
So I'm wondering did they suggest the date? If you don't mind me asking, did they suggest it? Do they think it's achievable? Is it enforceable in the case of the private contractors under their current contract? Those sorts of things. Have those been ironed out, so to
so
speak?
we were really clear to just say that all they would do is to adopt the standard, not necessarily roll out with operations implementation. We're going to leave that to TCHC and how that was going to work out, to be quite honest. So we would make, and give them 6 months to review on how that rollout would be, but they would try to adopt the standard by that time. So not to have every building fully inspected, that's not what we're asking, is to simply strive to the same standard that's referenced in the vital service disruption report, so that we can align the privately owned buildings and the TCHC owned buildings, and everyone's heading towards the same direction.
So you're just asking us as a shareholder to ask them to take on that standard. The board itself will get the report as to how that would happen.
That is my hope. I don't expect anyone to have all the buildings inspected.
Right.
That would not make any sense. But it's simply to adopt that standard or an equivalent to that standard. The one thing I do know is that TCHC has an electrical preventative maintenance program, but they, as far as I can tell, that program meets 2 of the 4 pillars in the ESA standard. And the ESA recommended standard has 4 components. The TCHC electrical program has 2. So can we get everyone to the 4 pillar program?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Tory?
Well, I'd just like to follow along, Madam Speaker, with that line of questioning to Councillor Wong Tam through you. If we could put the motion back up, I think that a lot of the words you were just using a moment ago, my concern about this is that I think it is the worst, and I've said it in this chamber before, it is the worst corporate governance for us to have a board that we take great care in appointing of a housing corporation, and then to direct them in a very granular fashion like this. And some of the words you were using just a moment ago I would have had much less trouble with in the context of saying, for example, I think you said here a moment ago about an equivalent standard, if there was such a thing, and that's not mentioned here. You said that you want, you actually have the wording in the motion, as through you, Madam Speaker, of saying that we direct the Housing Corporation Board to direct the Chief Executive Officer to adopt. And for me, sitting here as one member of council, I have no idea what this standard provides for. You do, and I commend you for the fact you've done the work, and you know how much I share your concern about the 650 Parliament and aftermath. So I would just ask you whether you might like to just change the wording a little bit to make it very clear we would like to see that done. We would like to have a report back not in 6 months but maybe even in 30 days as to the implications of adopting the standard, or whether there is an equivalent. Would you consider that? Because I would feel better that we were asking them to get back to us on this, as opposed to telling them that this is it. Without us, people like me, I don't know how I could vote on this without knowing what this standard is.
So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think that, and for by way of clarification, the first portion of the motion was actually copied directly from previous reports from council. So we were trying to determine, do we direct, do we request? And it was actually copied from previous language that was generated from this particular governing body. So if it's actually easier and more palatable, I can change the first word, sort of I can change the direction to request, because it was something that we were a little bit unclear about internally in the office, but we copied from a previous motion. So therefore, if I just amend my own motion by way of a request from the mayor, that City Council as sole shareholder request the Toronto Community Housing Board of Directors to direct the President to do this body of work, that would be, and they can report back internally.
And just if I may, Madam Speaker, maybe suggest, I'm very happy you should put a time limit on them to report back to us on that, so that we're not having this go off into the ether, because I share your concern. If it's good enough for 650 Parliament, it's good enough for our own buildings, some kind of standard like this, but I'd feel good if we had a report back from them on what the response was to this request that you're making. I'd be very happy with that, myself.
I was actually just going to let TCHC sort it out internally, so therefore we didn't get into all the management of it afterwards. To be quite honest, we were just going to ask you to do this, and then I would imagine the board of directors would then walk you through with the expertise of your staff afterwards. If there is a desire to report back to this body, I think that would be fine as well, or at least go back to the committee with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Councillor Carroll to speak.
Oh, well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad I asked those questions, because we're into that moment. I share the mayor's unease of, do we want to start running a board, or are we the shareholder, and once a year we might give them guidance? So I'm glad I clarified, because adopt by March 31st, does that mean, you know, hammer comes down to every contract, and then the financial impact from each contract holder comes back? But in fact, what we're doing is especially with the friendly amendment, what we're doing is asking the board to set a standard and begin that work. And I have no problem with that. On that score, we're still leaving the board empowered. And it's important that we leave them empowered, because they have a staff to manage. They have a corporation to manage. And we don't want to begin, from a discussion here, to begin to erode their ability to manage. And so, asking that question, I'm comforted. They do need to do it. I don't think anybody disagrees. Having, if you were sitting on this council when all of those people from, you know, dating back to under Wellesley, that people are so disadvantaged for so long, while we iron out our differences and our difficulties with the landlord. We all have to bear the cost of the tenants, and so we do have to do something about that. I do want to say that I think we can be brave and have these conversations right now, because we have all those dollars. There is good news on the horizon in terms of state of good repair at TCHC. We have a partner in the federal government right now. Repairs are starting to amp up. And most importantly, it starts with our own investment, our own ramping up of using city dollars to get state of good repair under control. As to the fires, I just wanted to say, as to the fires that we know are purposely set, Madam Speaker, I think if we look at setting a fire that's going to cause damage as a crime, then a discussion we had yesterday where it came up what you do in terms of police and resources, what you spend in the way of supports to communities, and what you spend in terms of the broken window theory. It has a role to play in what we're looking at. What is the broken window theory? It's a criminological theory. It's a theory that states that visible signs of crime, antisocial behavior, and disorder create an urban environment that encourages further crime and disorder. And it can include very serious crimes. Crimes that cause people in the 200 unit count to have to be evicted. Well, if we have no respect for these properties, if you're a young person and you're living in a place that from the time you came home to it from the hospital as a newborn baby, you just don't see any respect for that property being afforded by its owners and its landlords, you don't really have any respect for that property. The conditions you're living in seem criminal, and so criminal behavior becomes the norm. So there's a broken window theory going on here, and I think it extends to setting a fire over a building that seems as if no one cares about it. So setting a standard, adopting a standard, seems like the thing to do. We need to make it clear. I hope the board takes up this request, and it is a request, but they need to begin to make clear we are setting a new standard, we are making new investments, multiple governments are making new investments. We do care about this facility. It is not going to be so neglected that you just might as well set it ablaze. That's not going to be the way forward, and so that standard may well be the thing that sets us on a charted course such that setting a fire on purpose really would be setting a fire on something that really is a home. And I think you'll see that number go down. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the speakers. So if we can put the motion on the screen. Okay, motion, first motion is by Councillor Fletcher. All in favor? Carried. Second motion by Councillor Wong Tam. As amended. Okay. All in favor? Carried. Item as amended, recorded vote.
The item is amended, carries unanimously, 22 in favor.
Thank you. Page 3, EX 8.3. Yes?
Speaker, I know that you did adopt the order paper earlier. I was just wondering, while Fire Services staff are here, if you wanted to deal with on page 3, EC 7.1, because I've held it, and all I have is a very quick amendment.
Council is okay with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we'll go to page 3, EC 7.1. Councillor Carroll, Toronto Fire Services, you held it down. Do you have questions?
No, just a quick motion.
Okay. Motion then. Go ahead.
I don't know if, did I catch center table by surprise? There we are. So it's simply a simple motion that City Council requests the Fire Chief and General Manager, Toronto Fire Services, to report back to City Council in advance of the commencement of the 2021 budget process with recommended strategies as a result of the Toronto Fire Services Transformation Plan and Commission on Fire Accreditation International related review initiatives to enhance overall service delivery and address emerging and forecasted risks and needs of the growing city. Madam Speaker, just a quick explanation. This is, in fact, what is in the contents of the report that we considered at Economic Development. It's simply this. We had asked for this very report to be here in time for the 2020 budget process, and we received a report updating us, and the only recommendation is to receive. All I'm doing is taking the content of the report in which the fire chief says to us, I'd like to report back before the next year. That's a big step. I think it should be in the form of a recommendation so that it becomes something that we're tracking by date and looking for that report rather than just burying it in the content of a report. It's up to council to decide if they want to defer something for an entire year. So I'm just making what is the content of the report a recommendation of council. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Do we have any more speakers? Any more speakers? Okay. Just on Councillor Carroll's motion, all in favor? Carried. Item is amended, all in favor? Carried. Page 3, EX 8.3, Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much.
Just hold on before we start. Do we have any questions to staff? City of Toronto Investment Report. Any questions to staff? Councillor Layton, do you?
No.
No? Okay, Councillor Layton, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a motion. It's a rather long motion, so I had it advance circulated, but essentially it's referring the item back to the Chief Financial Officer to evaluate it through a couple more lenses about improving the ESG so that we actually meet what we put forward yesterday as part of our climate emergency motion to ensure that Toronto is a leader in using our own funds and investments to support, not only not invest in greenhouse gas intensive industries or investments, but in fact use those investment dollars to have greater potential in solutions, climate solutions. And I'd say this, it says on the front page of this, it tracks our earnings. Do I have to read the motion? It's a pretty long motion. Everyone has it in front of you. The only different is there's a revised motion that gives a little bit more time to the CFO until January 29th and 30th council meeting, just because that give her a little bit more time to put together the investments and consult with the necessary partners. I checked I looked at this report, and in a summary, it was actually just noted to me by Councillor Holliday, that our returns are actually below what was expected in the 3-point-something range, 2.7 and 3% annualized. You know that the Toronto Atmospheric Fund, which is an endowment, has an investment board, have very, very strong ESG policies to their investment. They're up at 14% this past year. So not only are their investments, in fact, fueling this shift away from fossil fuels and investing in solution-based approaches, they're also making more money. And so if you don't like the notion that we should be using our money and investing in good things, if you don't support that, and given that the climate emergency motion passed unanimously yesterday, I'd be surprised to hear if you didn't support that, because it was included in there. You can't turn down the fact that you can actually make more money by investing in climate solutions and reducing the exposure and the risk associated with climate change. So I'd hope you'd support the motion. Again, it is a referral. I'm not trying to change the investment policy at this time. I thought perhaps we could be provided with the evidence at our next, at a future opportunity, and make the change then. So I hope you'll support my amendment.
Yeah. Okay, so do we have any speakers on the referral? Okay. On the referral, could I have members of council please take their seats? Recorded vote.
Nobody asked for a recorded vote?
No.
Good motion, Michael.
Thanks.
Councillor Layton, please.
I know, really.
The referral is adopted 19-2.
Thank you. Page 3, EX 8.13, Capital Variance Report. Councillor Carroll, you held the item down. Do we have questions to staff? Are there any questions to staff? Councillor Carroll, do you have questions to staff?
Oh, there we go. Actually, no, I don't, Madam Speaker. I can release it. I'm sorry I was late this morning, or I would have released it then. I was late because I was writing something. Yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Carroll is releasing on page 3, EX 8.13, capital variance report. All in favor? Carried. Page 3, IE 7.8, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Robinson,
Sorry, I'm here.
you held the item down. So does anybody have any?
I don't have any questions. I do want to move a motion.
Okay, anybody have any questions? No, okay, Councillor Robinson, you held the item down.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. If the clerk could put the item on the screen, the motion, please, and I'll be very brief. So what item? Oh, I had a motion on that. Yeah. Maybe I should stand down, Madam Speaker. Maybe I should stand down because they're looking for the motion. I know there's other people who are speaking on this.
Councillor Robinson, you held the item down, so you're the first speaker. Do we have the motion? Okay, but do you have Councillor Robinson's motion? Did you hand it in, Councillor Robinson? You got it? Okay, if we can put the motion on the screen. Okay, Councillor Robinson, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the motion is before you, and it's really a report back annually on ward-specific and divisionally specific updates. So I want to start by thanking staff for their great work on this comprehensive strategy, and I have a small amendment just to strengthen really the implementation of the biodiversity strategy. I believe the chair, Councillor Pasternak and Councillor McKelvey also have motions on this, and I hope that you'll support them. My motion seeks really for the relevant divisions to provide an overview of updates and successes on the ward-specific and divisionally specific basis in their annual report. So everybody knows that various divisions and bodies or agencies are involved in this. And so Ward 15, we are very fortunate in Ward 15. We have a number of ravine areas, very crucial areas to our neighborhoods, communities, and quite frankly, the entire city. And so this will hopefully ensure a multi-divisional approach on implementing this strategy and improving our natural and ravine areas that I think personally have been neglected for much too long. So I hope you'll support this motion and the others that are coming.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also have a motion that City Council requests Chief Planner and the General Manager, Parks, Forest and Recreation consider aligning the reporting timelines for the biodiversity strategy and the ravine strategy. We're at a point where we have multiple great, very important environmental strategies for the city, and a lot of them are interrelated, and so I just think that it makes sense that we report back on the biodiversity strategy at the same time as the very much related ravine strategy. And I very much would like to thank Councillor Robinson for her amendment as well, that is looking at breaking it down to the ward level. I didn't take this as far as I'd like to. I would like us to get to a point where we have a scorecard that tracks all the actions, and that is also reported back annually. And I was thinking it could be with, red, yellow, green to show where we are at with those actions. But I do think that Councillor Layton had a really good idea that we should report back with, rats, raccoons, and possibly a beautiful, majestic deer on that scorecard. So while I'm not bringing that forward at this time, I do think we need to move towards more action-based, metric-based tracking of the biodiversity strategy in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I don't have a motion. I just wanted to rise to speak to this item because in 2015, I was the councillor that put forward the motion that kind of initiated this, and it happened in a really interesting way. And I just wanted to, our policies, they kind of have a story behind them. I think when normally it's a phone call from a constituent, maybe a couple, we see a pattern, we say, you know what, this is systemic, we want to do something about this. There was 2 phone calls in particular that, one phone call, one conversation over my dinner table that resulted in bringing a motion forward. One was a dear old friend of mine, Leslie Adams, that works for an organization called POWER, People for Our Water and Environmental Resources at a Halton region, came to my office and said, you know what, the UN has declared this the decade of biodiversity, but no municipalities are actually stepping up and implementing biodiversity plans to ensure that the animals, the trees, the species within their jurisdictions are being respected, or that their health is being monitored and improved. And I thought, well, you know what? We've got so many great divisions. We've got such great plans on the books. There's no reason why we couldn't loop them all together in a cost-appropriate way and ensure that in our own activities that we weren't watching out for biodiversity in the selection of tree species and our development application and review. And then what really kicked me or pushed me into action was my partner, my wife, came home one day, and she's a birder in this city. She likes to watch and listen to bird calls and ID birds. And she came to me and said, you know what, Mike, they're tearing down an old chimney in the East End that we know is housing for chimney swifts, an endangered species in the province. And she said, who catches that? Like why are you letting them tear it down? It's roosting season. There's a lot of baby birds in there, and this is an endangered species. And I said, you know what? There isn't one. Like, a development application comes in, we check to make sure it's safe, we check to make sure it's being done according to the requirements of the building code and whatever safety regulations that go into the level of demolition that's happening, but we would never consider whether or not there was endangered species habitat. It's just not something we do. Maybe other municipalities that are further out of an urban context, that they spend more or pay more attention to the habitat when it's a green field, but we don't when it's a gray field or a brown field. And so that is just one of the small things that I think we could easily change that would help protect the diversity of species that we have within the city, and in fact make improvements. And just this year, we opened, as a result of some phone calls to M&R to monitor some of these chimneys that were coming down, they've actually started to build these fake chimneys in such a way when the other chimneys are coming down in order to protect the habitat in those particular locations. So that's just a small example, and I just think it's an interesting kind of way that policy comes into this chamber in this world. It comes from the conversations we have with friends, the phone calls from our constituents, and in this case, a conversation over dinner with my partner. And I think that we should all remember that there are backstories to some of this that can help inform how we do and make policy in the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion that City Council direct the General Manager, Parks, Forestry and Recreation to report back to the Infrastructure and Environment Committee. And it builds on Councillor McKelvey's motion to align biodiversity strategy, ravine strategy, and the recently released Toronto Regional Conservation Authority trail strategy, which we were working on Friday. And I just want to thank my colleagues for the commitment to this endeavor. Councillor Robinson, Councillor McKelvey, Councillor Layton, and of course I think Councillor Bradford's going to be speaking next. As most of you know, we have a biodiversity plan. We have a ravine strategy, and as I mentioned and referenced in my motion from the TRC, a very exciting trail strategy. And you know, I grew up in a household that backed onto a ravine. And I can't tell you how adventurous, how inspiring, and how important it is to have sort of a natural habitat in our local communities. But it's very important that as we move forward with these initiatives, that we make sure that all the strategies are aligned. If we're going to have a trail strategy, and a trail strategy means that we will be sending tens of thousands of people through our various ravines. I think the philosophy is to enjoy our ravines, but also protect them as well. If you're going to have a trail strategy, you also need to align that with the ravine strategy and the biodiversity strategy, so that everybody respects the natural environment, but at the same time enjoys it. I think that once these strategies become more mature, we're going to see very exciting opportunities for hiking and walking in our different woods across the city. We're going to see enormous potential to be able to explore the great ravines that in many ways are a barrier to exploring now. So this is great for the environment. This is great for the local residents. This is great for the City of Toronto. And I think in the years to come, as we protect our ravine system, as we respect our biodiversity, and as we leverage our trail system, we will be able to see that you don't have to go up north to enjoy the beauty of the great outdoors here in Toronto. You can explore it in your own local neighborhoods with safe, accessible trails, and at the same time protect the natural habitat and the natural environment. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to rise and thank staff for their work on this, particularly Jane Wells, Shane Winiger, and Kim Strathan from PFNR. This is a fantastic report that's really important for our city. The 10 principles and 23 actions outlined in the document are going to be really critical as we chart forward in increasingly challenging times when we're talking about preserving our ecological diversity in a city that's facing so many pressures and such a tremendous amount of growth. I think the motions from Councillor Robinson, McKelvey, and Pasternak strengthen the document and will provide a really important reporting mechanism for us to get those updates on a regular basis. And of course, I'd like to thank Councillor Layton for all the seminal work he did up front on this and encouraging the city to actually think about these sort of things. As Councillor Pasternak noted, we now have this great opportunity for alignment. We have a ravine strategy. We have a resilience strategy. We're doing flood protection in the Don. We had a very important conversation about climate change yesterday and recognizing the importance of that and our actions going forward here at the city. This plays into that perfectly and is something that we need to continue to keep at the forefront when we're making our decisions across all of these fronts. It's very exciting to have Toronto's first biodiversity strategy in front of us, and just want to thank everyone for their work on this. It's a fantastic report. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Put the motions on the screen. Pardon? Yes, okay. Okay, motion 1 by Councillor Robinson, recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, please. Councillor Matlow, your vote, please. Councillor Ford, when you're seated. And Councillor Karygiannis, please. Councillor Karygiannis.
You're pressing the wrong button. I see your name up in the middle.
The amendment carries unanimously, 23 in favor.
Motion 2 by Councillor McKelvey, recorded vote.
Councillor Cressy, please. Councillor Matlow and Councillor Karygiannis.
The amendment carries unanimously, 23 in favor.
Motion 3 by Councillor Pasternak, recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, please. Thank you.
Councillor Fillion, please.
The amendment also carries unanimously, 23 in favor.
Item as amended, recorded vote.
Councillor Cressy.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
The item as amended carries unanimously, 23 in favor.
Page 3, IE 7.9, number of tickets issued and charges laid. Councillor Fillion. Questions of staff?
Yes, I'll start with questions of staff.
Okay, questions of staff.
I think they're just coming down.
Oh, okay.
Hold my time till they come.
while we're waiting for staff for Councillor Fillion, I just want to acknowledge Sean McAuliffe's civic planning classes here from the University of Toronto. I just wanted to acknowledge them and hope they enjoy their visit to City Hall and learn lots.
Okay, so is the staff here for the, okay, go ahead, Councillor Fillion. Oh, hold on. Okay, go ahead.
Am I correct that as far as protecting city trees, costs are no longer an issue because we have a system of recouping those costs from inspection fees? Would that be correct?
Through you, Madam Speaker, we do have a cost recovery for enforcement, on inspecting enforcement trees under enforcement.
Right. So in trying to enforce a situation where you have home builders not protecting the city trees or damaging city trees.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's correct.
And we can recover those costs, whether it's proactive enforcement where we find violations or when it's complaint driven. Either one we can.
That's correct.
So there should be no impediment to protecting trees from a cost point of view.
Through you, Madam Speaker, provided we have the sufficient staff. There is an overwhelming number of requests that exceed the number of staff we have.
But you can pay for whatever staff you have. So if you needed more staff, if you needed to adjust the number of staff depending on the situation, you can do that, and it doesn't have budget implications.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Then moving to, whether we have the other tools. So my understanding is the tools we have are inspection fees, orders to comply, stop work orders, and the laying of charges. So we have those 4 different tools in our arsenal, correct?
That's correct.
So between having the dollars and the tools to protect city trees, the only reason that we should have trees going unprotected and us not doing something about that would be a need to fine-tune our strategies, combine tools, make sure we have the proper resources at play. We should, given what we have, there should not be very many instances where city trees are not protected. Would that be correct?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that is correct. I mean, this is a relatively new program. It was through the wisdom of council that initiated it. It's still only a second year of pilot. We've made some major improvements, but you're absolutely correct, Councillor. There's some room to grow.
Thank you, and I'll acknowledge those improvements. And we had a productive conversation last week, and I take it from that you would sort of welcome the opportunity to perhaps do this report with to provide sort of a more accurate, larger picture, but also to look at how we can learn from the data and make improvements to our system.
Through you, Madam Speaker, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for questions. To speak, Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. I have a motion. Request staff to report to the January 9th, 2020 Infrastructure and Environment Committee meeting with a report outlining for 2018 and the first 3 quarters of 2019 the number of proactive inspections, the number of sites where complaint-driven inspections took place and infractions were observed, the number of inspection fees charged on first and second visits, the number of orders to comply issued, the number of stop orders issued, the number of Part 3 summons issued, and most importantly, recommendations on how these tools can be better utilized for tree protection. So as we just heard in response to the questions, money shouldn't be an issue because we're able to recover our costs through an inspection fee. We also have 4 tools: the inspection fees, orders to comply, stop work orders, and the laying of charges. So we have the resources, we have the tools, and the only thing that's missing is how to coordinate all of those things, make sure we have enough staff, and that they all have the correct marching orders. Currently, we are doing a better job than we were certainly 2 years ago of protecting city trees from home builders, but 2 years ago, that's because we were doing a completely dismal job, and I do thank the staff that has improved considerably, but there are still many instances, and we all have them, especially those of us that have a large amount of new home construction, where it is the home builders just consider the trees an inconvenience, and they frankly don't care if they get a $700 and something ticket. It's the cost of doing business. They're building homes in Willowdale that will sell for anywhere between $2.5 and $4 million. So they're not really concerned about a $700 fine unless we keep going back, and then if they haven't fixed the problem a day or two later, they get another fine, and then they get a stop work order. And then if they severely damage or kill the trees, or the trees suddenly disappear in the middle of the night, they also get charges laid against them. So we are doing a much better job, but we need to do a much better job still. You know, we go to great pains, both as staff and as a council, to protect city trees when homeowners come in and want to remove a tree or damage a tree, but we are considerably less diligent and effective at protecting city trees from home builders. So I'm heartened by the staff response that there is room for improvement, and they seem to have some ideas on how to do that, and I look forward to getting the report back on exactly how that could happen.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have motions I'd like to move, and they're on the screen, and I want to thank Councillor Fillion for his motions, which are excellent and should help the process. My motions actually, I think, augment his and support his, and really item 2 gives us additional information in our reporting out, which I think is important. My ward, I'm sure your wards, have not really repaired from the ice storm in 2013, and that's why I formed a little committee in the former Ward 25, now Ward 15, to look at these issues, and we put forward a number of motions. I remember working closely with now retired Arthur Beauregard on this, and that was a very pleasant experience working with him. And yes, there has been improvements. I moved a number of motions to improve investigation processes and reduce the number of trees that were being removed. But I'm a bit discouraged by this, what we're hearing today, and so that's why I'm moving these motions, because we just have to make sure this is a priority. Certainly in my ward, along with Councillor Fillion's, there's so much infill and construction and renovations, and clearly, as he just stated, trees are being completely disregarded in these processes. So proper planning and care are needed to preserve trees on building sites, and I'm hoping these motions we're presenting today will help with that. As I said, I was discouraged to hear the response time from urban forestry was on average 5 days. I don't think that's acceptable, and given the urgent nature of the tree violation complaints, I think it's imperative urban forestry staff are able to respond quickly and completely. Treatment from construction damage is also limited, so it's vital that once the bylaw contravention has been reported, that the compliance and enforcement unit must act in a timely fashion to prevent and protect the tree from injury. So I'd like to see more proactive action really being considered as part of the tree building permit process. And I know urban forestry, I'm certainly very aware they're doing an excellent job, and things have improved dramatically on the tree-related matters, but I'd like to see this bylaw tightened up even further, because I could give you many examples, and I won't because they expose residents, but many examples where we're losing trees unnecessarily. And it's simply a line item in people's budgets, and that's got to stop. They are vital to the future of our city trees. They must be protected, and this body is here to do this. So I hope you'll support my motions.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow.
Madam Speaker, I want to express my support and my gratitude to both Councillors Fillion and Robinson for their leadership on this important issue. This absolutely reflects a priority of the residents of Toronto St. Paul's, and on behalf of our community, I just want to express my appreciation to both of them for really putting a focus on this priority and ensuring that is part of what we're going to do moving forward. So thank you.
Motion by Councillor Fillion. All in favor? Okay, recorded vote.
Councillor Cressy, when you're seated.
The motion carries unanimously, 21 in favor.
Motion by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Recorded vote.
Could be soon, like almost next. There's only one item between us.
Be nice if we could get it done before break.
You might notice that these are basically everybody wants to know the same motion.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Fillion, please. Councillor Carroll, please. Councillor Carroll, your vote, please. Yeah, Councillor Perks, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 21 in favor.
Item as amended. On favor? Carried. Since we have forestry, do we want to just go to the other tree issue so we can, staff could leave? Okay, page 4, NY 8.34, application to remove a city tree. Councillor Cole, you held the item down. Do you have questions of staff?
Today's a great day for trees anyways.
You have questions of staff?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to ask staff to clarify what the policy is for the removal of a tree, request to remove a city tree as a result of an application granted to a builder developer to build on that site. What is the role of the urban forestry? What is the role of building to grant that permit, and what happens to the tree?
Through you, Madam Speaker, there's a complex answer to that. However, what I'll do is I'll answer it at a high level. Essentially, if a Committee of Adjustments or TLAB grants a permit for consent of a property and there's a tree involved, if the tree is on private property, then that ruling exceeds the bylaw. If the tree is on city property, then city can refuse, again, still refuse the permit. The only way a permit could be issued is if the city staff, under the direction of the general manager, and the local councillor agree on the removal. The local councillor needs to authorize the replacement plan. At that point, we can authorize removal of that tree. Does that answer your question?
Yes, in part. But what happens, you know, as was illustrated in North York Community Council, the person representing urban forestry said, well, they couldn't comment on the removal of the city tree because ALPAT or T-Lab Community Justice had made a decision to give them a permit. Therefore, they, as a matter of practice, do not comment on whether the tree should be protected or not. Could you comment on that?
Through you, Madam Speaker, again, every situation is taken at its own merit. If we're going to speak of those particulars, we could speak offline. But what happens is staff will consider whether or not, once, in this case, in similar cases, they deny the permit. They make a recommendation to the Committee of Adjustments to refuse the application due to the damage to the tree. Committee of Adjustments then agrees with city staff and denies a permit. They appeal to the appeal board, which is a designated board by this council. That appeal board then overturns the Committee of Adjustment. Staff then are in a conflicting position. They have a granted permit for, in this area, a consent of a property. But if they refuse the removal of the tree, then there's no access into the driveway, into their garage. It normally can be worked out with the local councillor. In the case where staff feel that there's going to be ongoing tension, which has been the case in the past, it goes on for several years, ongoing tension over this small tree, and a house has been developed where they have no access, staff look for reasonable decisions that will move us forward. In this case that you're talking about here, they look for reasonable compensation that would reinvest into the canopy with no loss. So there was what's recommended in front of council in this particular case is the structural value of the tree and 5 replacements. So they have to pay for the loss of the investment in this tree. That will be reinvested into the canopy, and at the end of the day, the dividends, the return on our investment, work out in the end. However, the policy that we have in place that will be followed is that staff then should really not recommend removal. They should allow council, in its wisdom authority, to decide whether the consent should take place or the tree should stay. So this is what's in front of the council today, whether you decide to keep the tree, and which would impact the development, or allow the development to take place and have the tree removed and receive the compensation that should equal itself out. Does that answer your question?
Yes. My time is up, right? Yeah.
No, you have another 20 seconds.
It's okay. I'll let Councillor Fillion
All right.
carry on.
Councillor Fillion?
Thank you. Similar question. So just to be clear, forestry is acknowledging, because they don't always, but forestry is acknowledging that the LPAT and the T-Lab have no jurisdiction over city trees.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's absolutely correct.
Okay. So in this, I'll go to this instance just because it's before us. So we have a situation where we have a healthy tree. Urban forestry staff take the position it's a healthy tree, it should not be removed, and they take that position prior to the planning decisions. Then outside bodies which have no jurisdiction over city trees, or an outside body that has no jurisdiction over city trees, decides to approve the development, you then have urban forestry change its position and say, oh, well, the tree should come down now because the provincially appointed outside body that has, or in this case, the city-appointed outside body that has no jurisdiction over city trees has approved the development. So should that have happened, what happened here, should that have happened?
Through you, Madam Speaker, the direction I have given staff is that that shouldn't happen. However, it's not to say that it may not happen in the future. We would work with the local councillor and determine what's in the best interest for the community and the urban forest. So, right in this particular case, we could have gone both ways. That's the truth of the matter. But again, the local councillor's position, who represents his or her constituents, is very important to urban forestry's decision-making process when it comes down to some of these areas that can go both ways.
But urban forestry is in the tree protection business. So I could understand if the builder appeals to council and council decides, okay, we're going to allow removal of the tree here, but why would urban forestry change its position? That's what I don't understand.
Just through you, Madam Speaker, I think the complexity, especially on this particular application, as I've reviewed it, is staff are, for the most part, stuck in the middle of conflicting approvals and appeals processes through other bodies around the actual development that's going forward. So I think staff use their best judgment in trying to make the best decision, both from the protection of trees perspective, by allowing for the removal of the tree, yet ensuring that the appropriate replacement fees and plantings are required, and with the development, which has already gone through committee adjustment and the appeals process. So as Mr. Doyle has indicated, these are not easy decisions to make, all with conflicting approvals processes. And we have had some conversations with legal and our colleagues in legal around how to clarify some of those processes moving forward so that we're not in that conflictual situation.
So I'm not getting a clear answer on whether there was a glitch with this particular situation and what happened should not have happened, or whether it's completely okay.
Through the speaker, I wouldn't say there was a glitch or an error, so to speak. I think staff used their best judgment given the situation at hand.
So I'm just, with the minute that's left, so I don't understand that, so you'll have to help me with it. Urban forestry's job is to protect trees, right? So why would, if there's a tree and urban forestry says it should be protected, why would that opinion change because someone else who has no jurisdiction over that tree says we're going to approve a development?
I agree, urban forestry is to protect trees, but we also have to ensure that we're working with the processes across the city to support whatever processes are moving forward. I think staff did their best judgment in this particular case, and in this particular case, it wasn't a decision that the local councillor or the constituents agreed with, and as Mr. Doyle has indicated, contrary to that, it's certainly council's discretion to reverse that decision.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you. I'm going to ask two questions. I think the first of the solicitor and then of the planning staff, just so I can get some information recognizing that this is an address in North York. And then just about the concept through you to the solicitor. So I guess we're going to be in a situation here where there's some approvals for a development to take place, consent and the changing of a home. And now we're dealing with the right-of-way immediately in front of the property. And in order for this development to happen as planned and as approved, this tree is there, and City Council, because of our bylaws, would have to authorize the removal of the tree. If we turn it down, where does that leave the owner of the property? What could they do next? I know we can't predict what they would do next, but I guess they have an option of giving up on their plans to develop, or could they do something else? Could they take us to court?
Well, Madam Speaker, as the general manager has indicated, this is a situation where there are conflicting approval processes, and certainly we can never predict when someone would try to use the courts to resolve disputes, but it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Okay, and recognize
there's certainly other ways to resolve these issues.
That's right. There's many ways to resolve it, but potentially that could be one of them. Is that another body would have to go and then make the decision, such as the courts. Okay. Through you, Madam Speaker, to the Chief Planner. Just so I understand a little bit of the background, I see that there's a TLAB appeal, and then before that there was a Committee of Adjustment application for some development and for a consent.
From a planning perspective, were there any objections from the city, or conversely, is the development otherwise supported by city planning?
Through the speaker, I do not have that information in front of me. What I can tell you is that when the matter would go to committee of adjustment for both the consent and any associated minor variances that would be required to facilitate the development, at that point in time, the application would be reviewed by planning and urban forestry. And if there were issues, those issues would have been brought to the attention of the Committee of Adjustment in the first instance. The committee would make its decision, and then subsequently on appeal, the T-Lab would consider those matters as well. So I don't have the background specifically. All I can tell you is that the T-Lab, having duly considered it, approved both the consent and the minor variance applications. And what's been outlined is on a single lot here where there's a land division, the conflict that then we came to, because there has to be a driveway to service the two new buildings, and the driveway and the tree location, the existing city tree location, are in conflict. And there evidently was not enough space to reconcile those two competing objectives. Ideally, in a new development, you would want to position the driveway in a way that would avoid the city tree, and everybody is happy, everything else assuming. Or in this case, I assume we would lose the city tree but replace it with perhaps new street trees to mitigate the impact of losing the tree.
Right, so I take it you searched for a staff report like I did, and you couldn't find one from planning that raised concerns on this?
Not in the last 5 minutes, no, but...
Okay, yeah, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. So, but theoretically, if staff have an objection to, consent or something going on at the Committee of Adjustment, the normal vehicle is that a report would be prepared, and we could probably do a search and find it, but neither you nor I could find that.
That's correct.
Okay, and then just out of principle, the Committee of Adjustment and the T-Lab, are they not delegations of authority from council conceptually?
Conceptually, yes.
Rather than us making the decision on all these matters, we delegate it to these bodies. And these bodies have gone through the process and they've made decisions.
That's correct. And they're supported by information that's provided to staff in making their decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a little bit related to the last item as well, but I just wanted to ask a question about the declaration to urban forestry for the review of tree-related matters. Is that done at what point in the building permit process? When is that currently taking place in that process of the building permit being issued?
So through you, Madam Speaker, when they apply for a building permit, at that point, when they issue the building permit with their drawings, they give them a tree declaration. That's when the homeowner or the applicant is aware that they have to declare whether a tree is in conflict, and that information on that declaration is to converse with forestry.
So would it be helpful for council to direct the director of Toronto Building to consider circulating the tree declarations to urban forestry prior to the issuance of the building permit?
So through you, Madam Speaker, they do circulate all of the tree declarations to urban forestry. It does not, because the Ontario Building Code, and I'd rather ask the Chief Building Officer to answer this, but the Ontario Building Code does not see trees as applicable law. Therefore, they can't withhold the permit because trees are not applicable law. So all they can do is, in very great cooperation, is they clearly identify that the city has bylaws respecting trees and that this permit is conditioned on them satisfying urban forestry. And that's where we get into the position of negotiating footprints. It's when they don't satisfy, that's when we go in through the position of enforcement.
Okay, so I guess my question is there something as a council we could do to assist that process in creating some clarity around that process and the running order of it and the timing and the, I guess, the staging?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I would direct all of those questions to buildings, because it's really up to the building department whether or not they can circulate prior to us, like the Committee of Adjustment would. but we're not applicable law, so it would really be the chief building officer that would answer those
The
questions.
call. Is the chief building officer in the chamber?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
Okay, let's move along. We want to get this agenda done today. Councillor Cole, you held the item down. Would you like to speak? Councillor Cole? Councillor Cole?
Yeah, well, this is a little tree, okay, but it's an important little tree. I really am very glad that Councillor Filion, Councillor Robinson are bringing out the importance of this tree, because it represents an ability of urban forestry and city council or community council to really ensure that the protection of a tree, a city-owned tree in this case, is given a full and complete report from urban forestry that is not overridden by Committee of Adjustment, not overridden by T-Lab, LPAT, OMB, Supreme Court, whatever it is. It is trying to establish a precedent, and that's why I think yesterday a motion related to this is going to go to Infrastructure and Environment Committee to answer the question about what can we do to clarify this whole issue. Because certainly people are being reasonable, I think, and knowing that a builder, in this case, wanted to sever a lot, a city lot, and they wanted driveways. And it shouldn't be an automatic that you, because you want a driveway, or two driveways in a separate lot, that you should be able to go to Committee of Adjustment, go to another tribunal, and override our tree protection bylaw. That's what's at stake here. And so it's not just this one little tree on 116 Briar Hill we're talking about, this Freeman maple, which is a very important species in Toronto. It's a combination of a silver maple and a red maple. But it's all about saying that cutting down city trees to accommodate development has to be given some really serious thought. And it shouldn't be just because Committee of Adjustment made a decision that all of a sudden urban forestry steps aside. Because we certainly know, I mean, in my ward, I get about 15 Committee of Adjustment meetings every 2 weeks. We cannot keep up with the rubber stamping of all this infill development that takes place up and down every street by the Committee of Adjustment. They basically, like official plan, secondary plan, I don't think anybody in the Committee of Adjustment ever looks at them. They always, the developers, infillers seem to get everything they want. So for us to, as councillors of the community, to depend on the Committee of Adjustment to protect our trees, forget about it. They won't, you know, they're building to lot lines, the monster homes, they're wall to wall with indoor swimming pools, cutting down trees, fences, walls in the back. So let's keep some control over our ability to protect city trees from automatic removal by a unelected body's decision, whether it be all those I've listed before. So that's what's at stake here. I know people say it's just a tree and who cares, but it is an important principle of us being able to ensure our urban forestry experts, and they're in a tight spot, as you know, our staff mentioned. They're caught between a rock and a hard place, or whatever it is. They really find it difficult to navigate these things because of the conflicting ordinances that come from Committee of Adjustment or planning oversights. So they're in a, but I think through what went on at North York Community Council last week and what's happening here today and what we'll do at committee further to clarify this, I think we'll come up with a very rational approach to ensuring that our trees get a fair hearing before they are arbitrarily cut down because of someone wanting to sever a lot. And so we know people have a right to build and whatever, and they certainly seem to be building everywhere. I don't know where they've ever been stopped building anywhere in the city anymore. So this is about standing up and saying, listen, we need some kind of integrity in our process to make sure that urban forestry has a significant role, no matter what the Committee of Adjustment says, rules, and all the other tribunals which overrule everything we do around here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion to speak.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I support Councillor Cole, and this is in his ward, in preserving this tree. I will concede that there is another argument to be made, a contrary argument, which Councillor Holliday, I'm sure, will give. I much prefer to take the argument in favor of preserving the tree. But what I'm really concerned about here is the issue of the position of urban forestry. When, several years back, I went up to a very tall spot to look over Willowdale, and it was really remarkable how you could basically delineate Willowdale without having a map just from the tree canopy. It was this huge area of green, and when you looked further in just about any direction, you didn't see that anymore. There was something really special about the trees in Willowdale. If you look from the same place now, you don't see anything like the same tree canopy, and that is in part because of aging trees and having to plant new ones where some have fallen over in a storm or whatever, but it is more the case because of new home construction and trees not being protected during new home construction. And those trees eventually, either us giving permission to remove them or they're so damaged that they end up dying and getting removed. So it's a really significant problem in all parts of the city where we have a lot of home construction or major home renovation. And what bothers me with this one is the call that urban forestry made. In my view, urban forestry should be sticking up for the tree canopy, because if urban forestry doesn't, who's going to? We know that the Committee of Adjustment doesn't. We know that the T-Lab doesn't. We sure as heck know that the builders don't. The trees are just in their way. So if we don't have some department in the city that sticks up for healthy, mature trees, then who's going to? And it falls to the councillor, in this case, Councillor Cole, and the residents in the area to stand up for the tree. So that's the problem that I have with this particular case. I will certainly be voting with Councillor Cole to preserve this tree, but the main thing I hope comes from it is that urban forestry get much more diligent about trying to protect the city tree canopy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wonder if council would agree to name the tree Lieutenant Maple, because it's a good little soldier. And that's really the position this tree is being put in. It's been put to the front lines by council. This is a really interesting discussion today. I didn't anticipate it, but what we've got before us is somebody that want to develop a property, and whether I agree with what they've done with it or not, it doesn't matter. It's gone through Committee of Adjustment and then through T-Lab, and those are our delegates. Council doesn't make all these decisions. We get those bodies to do it for us. I mean, we'd be here all day making small decisions about consent and the size of properties and setbacks and so on. The evidence I heard, though, shows that I don't think there was a planning concern on this. I wonder maybe there might be a local concern about feelings about this development. And here we are in a situation through some inconsistencies in the rules, and consequently I think Councillor Cole's right. I mean, we need to fix this irreconcilable two different sets of laws. But what I am concerned about is frustrating a development from going forward that is lawfully in a position to go forward by saying no to the removal of a tree. I mean, I'm sure we'll grant a curb cut in a heartbeat, or we would grant the permission to allow somebody to put a driveway over the right-of-way. Why we wouldn't follow through with the removal of a tree is not logical. And so, you know, if you did the mental exercise forward, if a neighborhood said, you know, look, we're tired of the consent counselor, we don't want anything else built in the neighborhood, is the answer just go plant a whole pile of trees in the right-of-way and just sort of stop development so that at least we have that lever? You know, the right way to do this would be to pass very rigorous bylaws and zoning bylaws that says, you know, you can't do this anymore. And to hold the line from that perspective as a councillor, but as a council. But I don't sense this council has the appetite to do that. And so we're in this process of these development applications following the process that they go through. So I'm not going to support this out of principle. It's not for lack of sensitivity of the local councillor. They may have some very strong feelings on this development or on the tree, and you know, I respect that. But looking at the macro process on this, I'm not sure that I want to ask this tree to be our little soldier, to hold the line on this development, because the applicant followed all the processes. And here we are with this right before us, and it just doesn't seem logical that we wouldn't follow through on applications that have been approved. Anyways, I hope council will give some consideration to this, but I think if this thing went further into court, I'm not sure we would win. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll vote on the item. Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll just be 30 seconds on this, but I think it's important. I think we all think it's important. So I have to say that no one is in a better position to understand what's happening in the tree canopy across the city, but particularly our specific wards. No one is in a better position than city councillors. We know what's happening currently in our wards related to the tree canopy. We also know what's in the pipeline. And it's a real snapshot, real bird's eye view of what's happening, not just from extreme weather events that often affect trees, but also development. And many of us have a lot of that happening, and the victim often seems to be the tree, and as we know, trees are our lungs in this city. So I just think it's so important that we listen to the local city councillors on this issue, because they're in the best position to advise us. And I also think, as a big picture item, I'll put the chief building official on notice that I will be coming to speak to you about really the process of circulating the tree declaration to urban forestry for the review of tree-related matters prior to the issuance of a building permit. So I will be looking at that issue more thoroughly.
On the item, all in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, when you're seated, please. Councillor Karygiannis. Councillor Bailao, could we get your vote, please?
The item is adopted 17-2.
Page 3, PH 8.8. Councillor Matlow, you held the item down. Do you have questions?
No.
Councillor Matlow.
No, I don't have questions.
Does anybody have any questions? This is on page 3, PH 8.8. The Auditor General's recommendation on regarding Section 37 and Section 45. No questions? Okay, Councillor Matlow to speak.
I'd like to defer this for one cycle.
Councillor Bailao, this is your item. Well, it's on planning and growth. Okay, all right. Go ahead, sorry.
It's just one line to defer
Yeah.
for one cycle. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. I'll say as much as I can outside of the confidential attachment. But I can't actually hear much right now, Speaker.
Come on, can I have some quiet, please?
Thank you. I was just saying that I'll say as much as I can without speaking directly to the confidential attachment. What is in the public version that for many years, as we all know, we've been achieving agreements with developers to contribute funds to our quality of life, whether it be through Section 37 or Section 42 of the Planning Act. And those days, we understand, may not go on for much longer. And it's incredibly important, I would submit, that every penny that we are able to contribute to our communities, to infrastructure, to parks, to social services, that we do. And that's our job. And that's what we want to do on behalf of our neighborhoods. And no developer should act as a scofflaw at the end of the day. If there's an agreement, then you should honor that agreement. And I believe that most developers want to be honorable to that agreement. I believe that there is an opportunity to achieve the goals in a way that is different than what you have read in the confidential attachment. I have reason to believe that if we defer this for 1 month, that there will be more money in the city's coffers than there would if we supported the confidential attachment today. If any of you would like to ask me any questions offline, I'm very happy to discuss that with you. But I believe that there is a very real opportunity to achieve our goals and have more funds towards our priorities if we defer it for 1 month than support the recommendation today. And I should just make it very clear, there is no loss in doing that. In other words, all of you have read, I expect, the confidential attachment. So you know that whether we do that now or do that next month, it doesn't actually matter. Like it makes no difference at all. But if you give it 1 month, I'm giving you my assurance, not that I know that we will be successful, but I think that there are opportunities with some of the subjects of our concern to improve our financial condition. I'm speaking that way only because I'm trying to talk around the confidential attachment, so please understand. But if you could have a little faith in what I'm suggesting to you, I would appreciate your support.
Councillor Bailao, do you have a question to Councillor Matt? Okay, just a sec, okay.
Just want to make sure that, and I understand, because it's a confidential, I just want to make sure that I understand correctly, maybe everybody understands, that you might have information that might be helpful to staff to maybe secure some more funds.
Thank you.
Is that it?
So staff and I have been in communication extensively, and we believe that there is an opportunity for more funds to go into the city's coffers to do really good things.
On a specific situation that is on the confidential report there.
That I can't discuss.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. So on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Page 4, SC 8.4, Scarborough Community Council, Councillor Crawford. Do you have any questions to staff?
Madam
Okay,
Speaker.
questions to staff.
Yes, I just want to, on the overall project, it came to council about a year and a half ago, and since then, there's been some numerous improvements to the application. So I just want to go over with them. As part of the application, we have a new park, 1,200 meter park that is actually going into this application or this site. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes, through the Speaker.
And it's 2% over the dedication that's required?
Yes.
The original plan had a 3-meter setback. We're now at a 5-meter setback on the plan. So I don't know if you know all the specifics about this, but this, being on Eglinton, I think everybody knows, is the potential future of the Eglinton East LRT. And there's been some back and forth with the applicant on the setbacks. I'm upwards of 5 meters, 8 meters, 12 meters. Haven't really been able to get a specific number down. But on Eglinton, it's about, do you know how the width of Eglinton is on that portion of Eglinton all the way down to, I think, Victoria Park where the LRT is being made? Do you know the width of that, the widths of the...
I don't have that information. I would imagine that it's quite generous at that
It's
location.
it's about 36 meters. There's 6 lanes on Eglinton. Some of the conversations with the applicant, planning, have been, requesting upwards of a 12-meter setback. Do you know of any other setbacks along Eglinton on the LRT portion that we're building now, where there's been demands or requests for anything more than, say 5 meters that's presently before us?
Through the Speaker, I'm advised that staff, and this is in the context of the EA not being completed yet for the Eglinton East LRT, but I've been advised that staff have been speaking to the applicant about an 8.5-meter setback. And the applicant's proposal, at least along Eglinton, provides for a 5-meter setback. It is difficult to conclude that kind of discussion when the EA has not been completed, and you, Councillor, are pointing out, the variability in the conversation. But my last information from staff is they were seeking an 8.5 meter in a pre-EA kind of mode that we're in right now.
Okay, and understanding that if you do 8.5, I was privy to, I guess, 12 meter at some point, the impact of an 8.5 meter on the site and adjoining sites. So would we, number one, be looking at any sort of expropriation on adjoining sites if we were to get the 8.5 meter here? And have there been discussions with the applicant? I mean 3 to 5 meters, there's a certain point where it's reasonable to assume that we can get these setbacks, but when you start getting to 8 to 12 meters, that really impacts what you can build on the site. So have there been any conversations with the applicant or the owners on potential acquiring part or any sort of expropriations on this potentially in the future?
Well, I can only provide through the Speaker the context that we would complete an EA on Eglinton for that LRT facility ultimately, and that would provide the basis for us including in our official plan a widening requirement, and then development that proceeds along Eglinton would be required to provide that dedication. And that is the way the city aligns its transportation planning with its land use development planning. This development is coming in advance of all of that, and it poses a difficult challenge for the city because in approving the development in its current form, it will make the installation of that facility ultimately a little trickier. I'm not saying impossible, but it does make it more challenging to install transit after development takes place. And we very much try to put it in the other order, if you will.
So with the 5 meter setback that is before us, would that jeopardize any potential Eglinton East LRT from getting built?
Through the Speaker, it's hard for me to conclusively answer that question because the EA has not been completed. All I can advise Council is that we were seeking more than the 5 meters up to 8.5.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion?
Thank you. You are recommending this application be refused, is that correct?
Through the Speaker, we had originally recommended that the application be refused. In July 2018, that matter came to Council, and Council sent it back to staff, asking us to come forward with a bylaw that would permit the, generally speaking, the townhouse development that's before us in the application. Staff, of course, maintain its view that the application is inconsistent with the official plan.
So you're still recommending, your primary recommendation is still that we turn this down?
That's our advice, yes.
Yes. And I know we don't have time to cover all of this, but how much residential, if we were to follow the planning principles at place here, how much residential would we be allowing on this site?
Through the Speaker, I do not specifically have that number. I think, generally speaking, I would anticipate that we would be able to achieve more than what has been proposed here. And I think more importantly...
Oh, sorry, I'm just on, I'll come to the density, but just on the use, my understanding is that residential is not permitted on this site. Maybe I misunderstood that.
Oh, I believe it's a mixed use designation, so I think we're dealing with we're dealing with the typology of the development and
So
setting up a vision for the street that would see additional mid-rise development happen along the Eglinton line.
Right, so that I was coming to that point, which is this is a transit corridor. What type of development should we be approving along a transit corridor?
Through the Speaker, certainly in keeping with the city's current official plan and the new growth plan amendments from the province, we should be seeking higher densities along the transit lines in general, and then certainly in close proximity to transit stations, and there likely would be one at Danforth and Eglinton, even higher densities in proximity of walking distance, 500 to 800 meters. And this site is right at the corner.
So what type of densities would you, I believe this proposal is something like 1.87. What would you envisage at a site like this?
So through the Speaker, generally speaking, you see mid-rise development in the city at 4, 5, 6 times, depending on the site area, depending on the configuration. Those are generally the density levels you'd see in a mid-rise development.
So something that was, let's say, at least twice as dense as what's being proposed?
Likely, yes.
And what are the implications for the rest of the city when we are inconsistent, when at some spots we will just be inconsistent, where we'll approve, double the density that staff are recommending and say fits within our vision, and at other sites less than half? What does that do to other sites across the whole city?
Through the Speaker, in general, the City Council passes an official plan, which is a long-range planning vision, and we would very much hope, and I think the vast majority of times we're making decisions, incremental decisions, that advance the vision of that plan. So over a long period of time, we shape the city in that way. So these individual applications that we're making in this local area will set up and implement that vision of an intensified Main Street, and many of us see those in our neighborhoods with residential density, shopping, local services that support the vision for growth in the city.
So is the effect not just on this site, but other similar sites when we are inconsistent?
I would say the effect is the inconsistency poses a challenge for the long-term implementation of the vision. It will frustrate that vision. Townhouse development in and of itself is density, but perhaps now we will underdevelop other sites because we've set a tone for that strip that, in our view, is less than what we could ideally accommodate in that area.
Thank you.
Councillor Ainsley?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the Chief Planner. Mr. Lintern, so this proposal that's before us is the second time it's been here. The first proposal was 6 blocks of 4-story stacked townhouses, 198 units. The current proposal, as I understand it, is 5 blocks of 4-story townhouses, 182 units. So the number of units has gone down, and I guess the floor space has gone down by 3,000 square meters almost.
That's generally correct, yes.
So yourself and your staff didn't like the previous rendition of this proposal. Now it's before us today. It's overall on a smaller footprint.
It is slightly less, as was pointed out. There's a public park. We continue to have, I think when council sent it back to staff, there was an instruction to look as closely as we could at the townhouse guidelines to see that if we are going to be working with townhouses, that we achieve the townhouse guidelines. And there are still some deficiencies in this as a townhouse project in terms of separation distances and the layout of the site. It's a tricky site. It's a L-shaped site at the corner of Danforth and Eglinton with an odd bend in it. And it is tricky to lay out townhouses on the site.
And so when you talk about guidelines, so the previous rendition, the one that's before us today, it doesn't meet the guidelines or the parameters around the avenues study that this council approved, correct?
No, it's not mid-rise development. That's correct.
Yep. And then the other concern outlined in both reports was around the provincial policy statement of 2014. It doesn't meet those parameters either?
No, we feel it was not consistent, and that's why we could not, we make planning decisions that are in alignment with provincial policy. And again, being really under development, we thought we were not living up to the potential of the site.
Yeah. And so then the other, I guess, kind of plank that you also look at and you like us to look at because we support it, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe of 2017. This also doesn't meet the parameters of that either?
No, we felt that it didn't conform with the intent.
Okay. I also see there's no, so this is potentially on the Eglinton East LRT is going to run right by the front doorstep of this application. There's no affordable housing in it?
No, there is no affordable housing as part of the proposal.
Okay. And the other question that was raised at Community Council when we looked at this was around density. And I understand, and from the previous questions, that the planning staff would like more density on this property. The person that was representing the applicant and the developer on this site, when he was questioned at Scarborough Community Council, outlined the fact that if we didn't have these stacked townhouses and went for like an 8-story building or a 9-story building, something that was acceptable to your staff from a planning perspective, that the density on the site wouldn't increase. Would you agree with that?
Well, through the speaker, from my previous comment, my experience with mid-rise is that you see densities in the 4, 5, and 6 times level in a typical mid-rise. So I really can't respond to what you heard at Community Council as to why the proponent felt that we couldn't achieve that density.
Okay. And the other concern that was addressed across the street from this application, it's a large block of townhouses. My understanding, those townhouses were built long before we ever considered an LRT on Eglinton Avenue East. From a planning perspective, that's probably something that we would look at differently now because we're looking at a higher order of transit in Scarborough. Would you still look at townhouses across the street?
Through the speaker, there are also plaza sites and other sites in close proximity. So we're coming back to the vision for Eglinton East along future transit line, and we're trying to promote through these incremental decisions a new way of thinking about that community. The townhouse approach across the city, and I can think of a location on Dundas in Etobicoke where townhouses were built at one point in time because that's what worked at that point in time. But we eventually took townhouses out of the zoning bylaw, and Now we have about 4 or 5 mid-rise developments happening there. So the mind changes over time, and the climate of that community changes, and we hope to influence the direction that it goes in with some of these incremental approvals.
Thank you. Quorum call.
Members of council, please press your buttons to indicate your presence in the chamber. Thank you.
Councillor Matlow, if you could press your button to indicate your presence in the chamber, and Councillor Cressy.
Madam Speaker, there are 20 members in the chamber. Quorum is present.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, questions?
Yes, Madam Speaker. So I'm wondering if I can just sort of juxtapose this against the section of Scarborough that continues on for my ward. On Shepherd, it's my understanding that the development sites on the east side of Victoria Park, similar to mine, if they end up in appeal, even if we're talking about the Shepherd expansion, currently by Metrolinx, it's slated for 2041, if we're lucky. And yet, the applicants continue in appeal to use the argument this is a site of future transit, and they get their density. Is that not the case along the Eglinton expansion? Are applicants, because this applicant has come forward with not enough density, are they not coming forward saying there's future transit here, I want density? Did this start out as a more dense application?
Through the Speaker, I don't believe it started out as a more dense application. I think what's being described in the question is more often the dynamic, where we are getting applications for density before the transit is in the offing or funded or even in a plan. And in those situations, you will often see approvals, recommendations, but we might accompany that with a hold because we know that we really shouldn't be building that development until the transit catches up.
Right.
That's what I would call, orderly development, which is called for in the Planning Act.
Right.
The challenge here is, and I recognize that the market is not the same market across the city, and I think that's an issue that this council continually grapples with. The challenge here is that certainly there's an expectation that these townhouses will sell, probably in a weekend. So the product immediately right now is a sellable product, but the disassociation from the long-term vision, the planning vision for the city, we feel there should be a tighter relationship between what you might be able to buy or sell on the market and the overall direction the city wants to go in. It's a perfect world when all of those things align, certainly.
Right, right.
And that's what we work toward.
But despite the market, 182 units here, how did this get before council with zero affordable housing at this juncture? At the point it would have been applied for, we would have been talking about inclusionary zoning with the previous government, et cetera, et cetera. How is this before us with not one unit of affordable housing at a place like Eglinton Brimley that needs a massive shot in the arm for economic development, needs affordable housing for the people who live not in the swanky townhomes across the street, but north and south of the Eglinton corridor and all the way up to Lawrence? Affordable housing out here is badly needed, is it not?
Through the Speaker, it's certainly...
I'm asking that question knowing the answer because I drive there constantly.
Through the Speaker, it's affordable housing is badly needed across the entire city. There is not currently a planning framework in place in this local area, or for that matter, the city does not have the inclusionary zoning power yet to be able to require a component of the project to be affordable. So we're lacking that regulatory framework to impose that condition, and it wasn't achieved through the more informal negotiation process.
So I asked this, this is my last question, I'm going to give you a whole minute to answer it. You came to council, your planners came to council with a refusal report. And when you do that, you sort of know what probably will be the next steps, what might the owner do here. What does your crystal ball tell you, in your professional opinion, in refusing it? This site's not going to stay undeveloped. It's very attractive. It's not going to stay undeveloped. Would they go back to the drawing board and come back with density that they hear us wanting and affordable housing that they hear us wanting?
Through the Speaker, that's a speculative question. I think you've got our advice, which is before you, and you've got the application before you for townhouses, and it's in your good and steady hands to make that decision.
Fair enough. I put you on the spot, but I'm taking something from tone. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. When the City of Toronto does its transit planning, the planning department is involved in that so that we can try to match where we're guiding our density to where we're building our transit, correct?
Through the Speaker, it's the same chapter in the official plan.
Absolutely. And when we're evaluating potential transit lines, part of what we evaluate is the forecasted population in the area, the density in the area, so that we can project ridership.
That's correct.
And the business case for transit lines depends on the official plan guiding development to those areas.
Through the Speaker, we try to match a certain level of density, and you can see this now in provincial policy, to support ridership and support the viability of the transit system.
So if we approve development applications that are below those projections, that hurts the business case for planned transit investments, doesn't it?
Through the Speaker, over time, it would become an underperforming line, if you will.
So the effect, if we start to approve lower densities than what the official plan calls for, is to make those transit investments less effective and spend public money for lines that will be underperforming.
Through the Speaker, again, this is why we would hope to achieve transit-oriented development, TOD, or re-urbanize our avenues. It's been a long-standing relationship in our planning to support the viability of the transit system that we all want to build.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Mr. Lynton, through you, through Speaker to Mr. Lynton, you responded to Councillor Carroll's question with respect to whether or not this particular project started out as a more dense application, and your answer was, no, I don't believe so. Is that correct?
I believe in the context of I don't believe, stand to be corrected, but I don't believe it was originally proposed as a mid-rise.
Sure.
It was perhaps a more dense townhouse application.
This particular site has been in discussion for over 20 years. Are you aware that almost 20 years ago, when the owner came forward to ask the city for a higher density at this location, they were refused?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay. Would that be a surprise to you?
Well, again, through the Speaker, I tried to describe a situation
Well,
where...
no, I was asking if it would be a surprise to you. I mean...
nothing really surprises me.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. With respect to the overall area, and I think you sort of touched a little bit on it, what other mid-rise development is actually in the area now? And is there one planned beyond this particular site?
Through the speaker, I don't have that information at my fingertips.
So if I told you that there's none, would that be?
I would have no reason to disbelieve you.
Fair enough, okay, because I'm the counselor on the north side, where all the townhouses have been put in. Okay.
We're certainly seeing to the east in the Golden Mile a lot of interest for much more than mid-rise.
Right, but that's to the west.
Sorry, to the west.
Right, okay, no, that's fine.
Progression of the development is
Fair enough.
not here yet.
So you talked a little bit about consistency and inconsistencies and so on. Are all the planning decisions that are made by yourself and your team, are all those consistent with respect to the planning principles? Are there amendments or are there adjustments to those as part of a larger narrative, both in terms of input from the community and local councillors and so on?
So through the speaker, we have a policy-led environment in Ontario. We have growth plans, provincial policy statements, and we're bound as planners to, through our official plan, to give you advice that is consistent.
Right.
As you know, the breadth of consistency, and we can all point to the variability in that envelope that we're provided.
But those can change based on decisions that we make here.
Absolutely.
So this is not any different with respect to this approach.
It is not, no.
Right. They talked a little bit about I think the desired setback that I think you're looking for is 8.5 meters. Was that correct?
That's what I was advised by staff that we were seeking. A little bit more than what the... Yeah.
Right, and what is actually being provided now? Is that 5 meters?
5 meters along Eglinton.
Right, but you also said that that could work.
I believe I answered that in the position that we're in right now, without an approved EA,
right,
we're giving advice based on what we know now in advance of an approved EA and a final design. So it's a challenging spot that we're in.
You would agree with me, though, that this is area. It's very complex in the sense that what is there now and what perhaps a future intent and as a chief planner, what you'd like to see may take 100 years to achieve?
I don't know that it would take 100 years. If we could advance the Eglinton East LRT, it wouldn't be 100 years. I think that is a critical piece of infrastructure that's needed for that part of the city to advance the real potential.
Sure, and I can appreciate that, but this one project, this one site, does that fundamentally alter the desire and the intent with respect to the Eglinton LRT going up to Kingston Road to University of Toronto?
Through the speaker, it's one block in the foundation of that vision. I would hope that we could make as many decisions.
Is it a real block, though?
Is it a real block?
Is it a block?
It's at a corner. It's at the corner of Danforth and Eglinton.
Right.
So it makes it especially challenging.
Right, and then so I guess my final question to you, like in and around that area, you have on the north side you have No Frills, west side you have Shoppers Drug Mart, and this is mixed use. Could you speak to me with respect to the area just to the south of the site, the residential area that's there?
Through the speaker, it's a typical residential neighborhood. It's houses. What would you?
Well, I'm just thinking about the impact with respect to whether or not it's actually in keeping with the traditional community that's there.
Well, the townhouses
That was
versus
your
the
last
mid-rise.
question.
I mean, certainly we see that transition across the city where we're introducing mid-rise along our main streets, and we try to mold that mid-rise so that it doesn't affect the impact, doesn't affect the community. This is actually on the north side of the community to the south, so it actually is a pretty straightforward exercise. The site is tight, though, and it's a challenging site, whether you're building mid-rise or townhouses.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the questions. You pushed the wrong button. You pushed two wrong buttons. Okay, you pushed Councillor Robinson's button, not your button.
He's really serious about it.
Can somebody just delete that, please? Councillor Cole.
I would just like to ask if we could put the location of Eglinton and Danforth there on the screen so we can see it. And I just thought it'd be better, I know Councilor Carroll had the Google map, street map of it. Is that possible? If it is, I thought it might be helpful for us who aren't that familiar with the intersection everybody's talking about. Point of order, what was that? Are you telling me how to vote? Did you hear that, Madam Chair?
Yeah. Okay, come on, stop interrupt. Counselor, please. Stop interrupting. Okay, that's it for the questions. So rather go to the speakers. Do we have any quick releases before we recess? Then we'll continue this item later. Any quick releases? Councillor Wong Tam, did you want to release any of your items that you have? You have planning items?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I can release 2 items. The first one is on page 4, TE 8.11, 56 Yonge Street, 21 Melinda Street, 8 to 30 Wellington Street West. And there is, so I could release that item, Madam Speaker, and the subsequent reports to that. But there is also, sorry, I should mention there's an motion.
Yes, we have the copy that you circulated.
It was circulated yesterday.
Right.
And this is a follow-up with respect to some changes that we began talking about at the Toronto East Shore Community Council meeting. So this is a motion that's now prepared by staff, and I would like to move that.
Okay. So that's on page 4, TE 8.11. The motion is on the screen. On favor? Carried. Item is amended. On favor? Carried. Okay, and you're releasing T 8.70 as well?
Madam Speaker, I am releasing 8.70, alterations to a designated heritage property and authority to enter into heritage easement agreement, 199 Bay Street, 25 King Street West, and 56 Yonge Street. There is a technical amendment that staff have provided, if they can put that on the screen. And it literally is adding 5 more words to that particular clause.
Okay. On T 8.70, there is an amendment that's on the screen. On favor of the amendment? Carried. Item is amended. On favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay.
On page 5, CC 10.8, 203 Jarvis Street zoning bylaw amendment application request for directions, I would simply move the contents of the confidential attachment.
Okay. That's on page 5, CC 10.8. Councillor Wong Tam is releasing. On favor? Carried. Okay.
Thank you.
And what about 10.9?
We're still working on that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right. That's it for the releases. Okay, we'll recess to 2 o'clock.